Hello, welcome to the Vineyard Church podcast. For more information, visit us at vkcwest.com.
We're in a message series called The Art of Neighboring, and so we've provided some books back here, and it's something that we go through every couple of years, and we talk about pretty regularly because it's really part of our DNA. Everything we do as a church really comes out of this idea that Jesus said, love your neighbor. And so if you say, well, why does Vineyard, do this? And why does Vineyard do this? Because we're simply just faithfully loving and serving the people around us. And we've seen God do awesome things through that. And so there's copies of the book if you'd like. There's also little maps. You can write the names of your neighbors, get to know your neighbors, that sort of thing. Those are free. You can pick those up. 2 weeks ago, Steve kicked us off with, who is my neighbor? In other words, walking through this concept of the Good Samaritan and walking through that, Jesus was not just talking about a metaphorical neighbor, about loving your neighbor, but he's saying like your real neighbor that you live next to, or the real person that lives in the cubicle next to you at work, and you see 8 hours a day, that he wants us to love those people. Then last Sunday, we talked through the fear factor of neighbors, right? That a lot of times there's fear about just getting to know the people that are around us. And then we looked at an intentional way to move from strangers to acquaintances to relationships with our neighbors. And there's a little slide up here that shows that moving from stranger to acquaintance typically is getting to know your neighbors' names. But Jesus called us to something deeper, which is to actually have relationships, and talked about the concept of having like a block party or just a dinner party, or maybe it's just you and a few neighbors, but you're just getting to know those people, asking each other's stories and walking through that. Anybody start thinking through a block party in their neighborhood, or start pondering that at all? Yeah, we got one back here. Yeah, we got one back here. Yeah. So has your life been bad ever since you started talking about that? No? Okay, all right. It's good. I mean, you won the lottery this week, didn't you? Yeah, so yeah. No, but think about it. Think about it. Think about creating space for people to know each other in your neighborhood or at your workplace, in your community. And so there's a block party kit that's available. I think it's on our website and whatnot. You can download that shows you how to do it. But as we talk through this, there's a little bit like, would you tell your neighbor like what we've been talking about? That's a good question, right? Would you share with your neighbor like, like this thing right here, like that strategy, like does that feel a little weird? You look at it. In some ways, people could, like, wait, what are you doing? Moving from stranger to acquaintance, it's intentional. It's saying that we truly believe that the hope of the world is loving your neighbor, and that God does great things in that we can actually change things. But to think about it, as you approach this, as I approach this, motives matter, don't they? Like, what are the motives that I have as I'm loving my neighbor? And so I remember when I was, 20, I guess I was 25 years old, and had met my wife, Michelle, on Christmas Eve, and she had started working at the church that I was a part-time youth pastor at. And so in the morning I was a financial consultant, and then in the afternoon, after the markets closed, I'd go to the church and work and do stuff there. And I met Michelle on Christmas Eve, and then I started going to the office in the afternoons more. And my motive is that I liked her, and I wanted more of her, and so, but one of the, like her cubicle mates, Stephanie, says to her, she goes, because she was kind of a person like, come on, don't you get it? And she's like, he's coming here because of you. And she says to her, no, he just has work to do. She goes, he was never here before you. Like he was never in the office, like checking how the copier's doing, checking the supply on the paper, anything else. And so I had these motives, and ended up pretty good. So, but as we set out to love our neighbors, motives matter, don't they? So in other words, when we talk about neighboring, and this is important, when we talk about neighboring and loving our neighbor, we're not talking about an evangelism strategy. We're not talking about like, hey, now do this and then ask the question. Do this and get them to to put faith in Jesus, right? Like it's not a strategy for that. And to help you with that, though, because wait a minute, you're like, wait a minute, I thought that's what we do. We do that. But here's the distinctive. Ulterior motive versus ultimate motive. Jay Pathak and Dave Runyon in the Neighboring book, I really like how they put this. They talk about a book called To Transform a City. And in the book, the authors use the phrase ulterior versus ultimate motive to describe common motives in building relationships with others. Ulterior means something is intentionally kept concealed. An ulterior motive is usually manipulative, right? In other words, you're doing something else than what they think. It's when we do or say one thing out in the open, but intend or mean another thing in private. So the equivalent of this would be neighboring is like, you get know somebody's name, you talk with them, and you're spending time with them, you throw a block part of these things, and then all the while, the person ends up feeling like, oh, you were just doing this so you could, put your faith on me or that sort of thing, right? Anybody ever had an interaction like that? I know I did in the early days of following Jesus, and I'm just like, I'm talking, it's like, so your whole purpose of coming up to me was just telling me about Jesus. Yeah, but it's like, right, but like, what if you like valued me first? What if you just loved me? What if you just accepted me the way that I am? And then maybe that would come up. And so ulterior motive is kind of how that is. But it's when we, ultimate means the farthest point of a journey. So an ultimate goal is an eventual point or longed for destination. So the ulterior motive in good neighboring must never be share the gospel. In other words, it's like that's not the goal of it, right? It will happen, and it can happen, but the ultimate motive is just that, to share the story of Jesus and impact on our lives. So there's a big difference. So we need to drop like this agenda that's just like, well, if I do this, then I get this opportunity. And what we're going to talk through today is working through this authenticity, this motive in us as people. Because if we're going to set out to love our neighbors, then it needs to be done out of a place of authenticity where we're real people walking with Him. And so the desire, by the way, it's not a bad thing. I mean, that's a very good thing, right? Like this little light of mine, I want to let it shine. I want to share with people. I've got this good news I want to put out there, and I want people to know. And so it's not a bad thing whatsoever, but it's putting it in context in the way that trust is built, in the way that love is built within relationships in a community. And so Dave and Jay write in the book, we don't love our neighbors to convert them. We love our neighbors because we are converted, right? I mean, a Christian is somebody that is a part of new creation. A Christian is somebody that the reality that a Christian lives in is actually future, and yet they're going to live that way now, right? The Christian, we really have our home in a place where there's no more tears, there's no more dying, there's no more division, there's no more sin, right? And we can go on and on. And yet we say, by faith, I'm going to live that way now, even though everything around me is so different than that. And so we're converted, we're in Christ, we do this. So we love out of that place. And so Jesus gave us direction in this. In John chapter 13, verse 34, says, a new command I give you, love one another, as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. If you have whether it's a digital Bible or a physical Bible, that's something to underline. That's something to highlight. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And the context of this was Jesus was in the upper room and he's having the meal and with his disciples, and there was no servant there to wash feet from the long journey. And so Jesus takes off his outer garment and takes a towel and a bowl and gets down and kneels down and he says, come on, come let me wash your feet. And Peter and others, whoa, how could you wash my feet, Lord? Anybody ever had their feet washed? By somebody? Yeah. Pretty personal, pretty raw, right? Anybody ever washed feet of people? We used to do it when I coached football. When I coached high school football, it was at a Christian school, and right before the season, we would get all the players and the coaches, we'd wash their feet. That's a sacrifice. You ever smell football smell? But it was this incredible thing that just knit our hearts together with them, and they knew that we were for them. They knew that we loved them, and Jesus does this. And interesting is that all 12 of his disciples were there, including Judas. And after he washed their feet and they ate and they lounged together and they sat together, Jesus reveals, not everybody catches on, but the one that would betray him is Judas. And so Jesus knew that Judas was betraying him. Jesus knew that Judas was doing shady stuff. And yet, he kneels down and washes his feet. And it wasn't out of, as I know Jesus, it wasn't out of like, well, I'm going to show you. No, he was just loving him. Knowing that at the time, he was planning his demise. Planning that he would betray him. And Jesus says, I'm just going to love you. Wow. Jesus shows us the way in this, that we would be that whole. That our hearts would be that put together, that our faith in our lives and would be so integrated that our thinking would be in such a way that we would love people that way. That we would have such confidence that in Christ we have this incredible strength of life, that we can, even those that are betraying us, we can love them. What a way to live. This love, though, is not something that we can conjure up. I'm just going to get love. I'm just going to make it happen. Paul writes to the Galatian Christians that it's the fruit of the Spirit. In Galatians chapter 5, verse 22, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. So the first part, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, and it's first there. So what is this saying? It's saying that it's not a fruit of Cody, it's not a fruit of Mike, it's not a fruit of Matt, right? It's a fruit of the Spirit. So it's something that the Spirit does in us and that we get from the Spirit. It's like when you and I maybe hang out with friends and do things with somebody over and over again, we may start talking like them. People can even get the same accent as somebody else if they're from another place, because you start to be like them. And when we spend time with Jesus and as we follow him, what the Holy Spirit does is he works what he is like into us. And so in other words, if I want to have the love that Jesus had, well then I indirectly get that. I don't try to conjure up love in myself. I go to the one that is love. I go to the one that is joy. I go to the one that is peace. And as I am with him, I now have that in my life. That's how it works. And so motives, are important. It's like if this is just, in other words, Jesus is the ultimate example to take to our neighbors, is that it's like, even if my neighbor is never going to receive Jesus, even if my neighbor is never going to turn down the stereo, even if my neighbor is never going to move the fence the 6 inches back onto his property, even if my neighbor, you go down the line of those things, even if they never change, as a follower of Jesus, I can love them out of this deep well, that the way that Jesus has loved me. That's the picture we see. And so motives are key. So Proverbs 16:2 says, all a person's ways seem pure to them. Isn't that true? You ever try to work through an issue where both people, have good arguments for why they think they're right. And typically, if empathy doesn't enter, if seeking to understand the person first doesn't enter, you won't get anywhere. Both people have to sacrifice, or somebody has to sacrifice, but all a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. And this gives the idea, like, to weigh something is not, he sees our motives, but to weigh something, you have to, right? Anybody ever get on a scale, right? And see where you're at? You have to, I have this scale, and somehow it's turned to kilograms. And I haven't figured out how to change it back to pounds. So I'll send you a picture. Tell me how to do it, of the scale. But so every time now for like a month, because I'm just like, I put on the thing, like, first I did it, I'm like, hot dog, I'm doing good. Because I'm just like, man, I weighed that like in 8th grade. This is great. And so I could just choose to be delusional, right? And just say, I'm going to go with it. But so every time I have to get on there and change it, and move that. But if you weigh something, like, it takes effort. Like this thing, it's underneath this dresser. So I pull it out, and you got to step on the thing first. It goes to 0. And then now once I see it, I have to, hey, Google, how many pounds is this many kilograms, right? And so to weigh something shows intention. To weigh something shows that it's important to you. To weigh something shows that this needs to be measured to show where this person really at. So God looks at your motives and your intentions, and He looks at my motives and intentions. And sometimes we have relationship with our neighbors, and it's like, oh Lord, this person you moved me next to, and we have this self-righteous idea of ourselves. And typically God's like, well, what about you? And where are you at? Proverbs 21:2, it says, a person may think their own ways are right, but the Lord weighs the heart. Again, we as a church have a really good neighbor over here, Jose de Medeiros. His family has this property and house over here in the field, and then next to that there's a development here of houses, and Kim Brown actually introduced us to him, and really good dude, and his son and family. But there's been several moments where we met him. He came over, was interested in the project, and he, like you, he said, why is it taking so long? And I said, I don't know, man. But there were several times where he just said, hey, listen, if you ever need help, just let me know. And you don't know, right? Like, where is this at? And so, we need to dig this hole back out. We need to do this. We need to move these sheds, stuff. And he'll bring a worker over here and do different things and get dirty himself and all sorts of stuff. And I say to him, like, well, can I do this for you? Or can I thank you in this way? He says, no. Just thank you for giving me the opportunity to be a part of what God's doing. Yeah. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good way to live, right? Like, what if we approached our neighbors that way, that we just said, we just want to be a part of what God's doing because we know God's working in people's lives, the people we live near. So Jesus taught us 2 greats that we could be a part of, to be a part of what He's doing. In these 2 greats, the Great Commission and the Great Commandment, are really, they're like checkmate, in chess for a person. These 2 greats, that if you approach these greats and say, I'm going to live my life in this way, right? Like, you have all sorts of ways you can choose to live your life. We're marketed to all the time. Like, change this, do that. And if you're paying attention to like your algorithm on stuff, like, one day you'll get like, this is totally healthy to do this thing. And then all of a sudden, this is totally unhealthy to do this thing. Or now you got to take this, now you got to do that, and just turn it off. What if we just said the Great Commission and the Great Commandment? What if all things could be healthy? What if all things could be healed through these ways? I believe it. But in chess, checkmate is your king can't move anymore, right? It's if you move here, they've got you, and you're not allowed to move into checkmate yourself. And if you move here, they've got you. And so you take your king, and if you are a classic chess player and like do all the stuff, you take your king, turn him over. I'm checkmated. For a Christian, I think for anybody, but because a Christian has said, I will follow this, the Great Commission and the Great Commandment checkmate us. They don't They don't allow us to do one without the other. And here's what I mean. And Jesus is brilliant in his teaching, and God is really masterful in his design that people would live in new creation, that people would live in this new life that Jesus has brought in this way. And so the Great Commission, Matthew 28, 18 through 20. This church, by the way, this was the mission of this church. It still is the mission of this church, but this is the thing that the founding pastor and leaders put, like, this is what we're all about, the Great Commission. We still are. We communicate differently. But this was, when I was looking at this church, when we were talking about us coming out here to lead this church, this verse was everywhere, and I loved it. And it's still the heartbeat of this church. Matthew 28, 18 through 20, the Great Commission. Then Jesus came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, right? And he's died, risen from the grave, and he spent a bunch of weeks with his disciples, and now he's about to ascend to heaven. So these are his last words that he says to them. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations. So in other words, what I've been doing with you guys for 3 years, just go do that with other people. Go teach them to follow me, teach them my ways. Baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I'm with you always to the very end of the age. So great commission. Now the great commandment, Matthew 22, 37 through 39, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And so the Great Commission reminds us that we are to continue the mission of Jesus. But the Great Commandment reminds us that we are to continue the mission of Jesus out of an authentic and deep inner life with Jesus. That you don't take the Great Commission and just say, right on, just going to go do that. And it's just the facts and just the tasks. And I'm just going to do it and check it off. This is to be done through people that their main thing is loving and being loved by God and walking with him, and then loving the people in front of them. You ever met a Christian without love? I do most days. First thing, it's not Michelle. I look in the mirror, right? I mean, you ever have days like that? You're just like, I remember when I was a young youth pastor, and I've told this story because it fits and it, shows my own weakness and learning. And guy that was mentoring me, and I was more like this, like Great Commission, right? And I was serving on a team of youth people, and Dawn and Paige were my partners in ministry, and they were a couple years younger than me. I'm like 24; they're like 22 or so, and we'd do stuff, and it was just, I'm like, can we just do ministry? And it's like, it was just complicated, and they bring emotions into it. As a 24-year-old, been a bachelor since I was 11, living with my dad, I'm like, what are we doing here? We're just doing the Great Commission. And then Bear calls me into his office, and he goes, Cody, your love stinks. Obviously it stayed with me, 30 years later, just like, wow, how is my love? How is my love? And if the reality is, if my love is not strong towards others, in 1 John, the disciple John writes, then it actually reveals my true place with God. What does that mean? It means that typically if my love is cold towards others, it means that I'm not putting myself in that place of enough of like, God, here I am, I receive your love. Would you just love me, right? And so love out of an inner life is where it's at. So the Great Commandment, shows us that. So the purpose of all job descriptions of staff here at Vineyard, actually, this is on several years ago. We put this on there. We put to grow, or this is the purpose of all of them, to grow and mature as a disciple of Jesus, leading others out of a deep inner life with Jesus, right? And so no professionals here, right? Just practitioners. People that are walking after and following Jesus, and very imperfect, by the way. If you've been around long enough, you'll figure it out. But just people that are truly living a life with Jesus and then helping others do that as well. So a certain mindset helps us with this to create an environment of love within our neighborhoods, within our workplaces. And it's found in Philippians 2, verse 3 through 5. It says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus." Wow. Right? I mean, did you catch those things there? I'll read it again for me and for all of us. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. So how would that be if everyone in your neighborhood, your apartment complex, applied that? How would that be if rather in humility value others above yourself? How would that be? How would my workplace be, my neighborhood, if I didn't look out to my own interests, but each of the interests of others? And then in all of our relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. So I love this truth that's in the Art of Neighboring book. It says, if we live out the Great Commandment, an environment is created where the Great Commission can be effectively obeyed. Loving people who live around us fosters an environment where people trust one another. So when there's space where people are loved and trust is built, typically you see people come to Jesus like pretty regularly. That's what we see with the young people in this area. The fifth quarter that we start to do, September 11th is the first one. And come and be a part of that crew at least one night. We typically do 4 during football season. And come hang out one night. Come help. Come serve up some cheeseburgers to kids. And this is what happens with them is we just love them. We feed them. We provide space for them. And what we've seen over the last 8 years is we've seen them consistently come to faith in Jesus and get healed up and get freed up because they know they're loved and they know that they can trust the people that are here. And so when there's space for that, what if your neighborhood was like that? What if my neighborhood was like that? That it's a space where people can truly be who they are. And so what it does when that environment is created, we can share a great story. And the great story is your story as a Christian. If you were to dial in and drill in, we'll just do it a little bit right now, to the power of one's witness or testimony, seen in the New Testament or the Old Testament, it's pretty phenomenal. It is actually the thing that makes the difference for many people in their lives and brings hope to them. It's just your story. And what's hard is that you may think, my story's nothing. I don't know, whatever. It's not a big deal. But our stories bring hope and encouragement and strength and courage to other people. And it helps them. What it does is it throws something down alongside their own story, and they're able to see differently. Like you ever listen to somebody and you just feel like you're failing at everything or whatever, and maybe it's when you have young kids and you're just like, man, all the other moms have it together, or all the other dads, are able to do that, and yet you talk to other moms or dads, you're like, oh, all right, these are my people, and they struggle with the same things I do, that sort of thing. But stories are powerful in the lives of others. So there's John 9, and John 9 is powerful. This man, he was born blind, and so he was viewed as his parents or him somehow, sinned, and it's just passed down, and they were viewed as outcast and cursed and just dirty and bad and everything else, and yet Jesus heals them and then takes off pretty quick. And then all the religious people get all up in arms, and they keep asking him questions, well, what happened? And what this is? And the guy's like, look, man. And they're like, is this guy a sinner, this Jesus? And he's doing stuff. And he says, look, man, I don't know if he's a sinner or not, but this I know, I was blind, but now I see. right? And they're like, whoa. And then he says to him, he goes, are you asking because you want to be his follower as well? But I mean, just think about that. He's like, I don't even know him, but just like, this is what happened. And it's almost when he shares this, like it's this like fading back of people like, whoa, this story that's just shared. And then John writes in Revelation, I mean, think about this. I mean, have you read this before? I mean, that talks about they triumphed, speaking of Christians, over him, speaking of the devil, the beast, by the blood of the Lamb, and listen, by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from their death. The word of your testimony pushes back the enemy, pushes back all the stuff that we hate. The word of your testimony. Just you saying like, hey, look, I don't know, and I'm still in process, but I know that my life was this way, and I know that I met Jesus, and then I know that now I'm different now because of him. And it's not because of self-help, it's not because I'm greater, these things. I put out effort, but it was his power that changed me. You see, if we all were to just share the stories in our lives of Jesus, what a difference it would make for people. As a staff, in your booklet, the prayer booklet, there's training videos in there. The one for last week was about learning to tell your story. And so as a staff, Michelle led the devotion that day and said, what if you shared it in 5 words? Like, how would you describe your story with Jesus in 5 words? And then share in 1 minute or less, or share in 3 minutes or less. And it's something that we should be playful with like that. Because I will just tell you, the difference in many atheists' lives, the difference in many agnostics' lives, the difference in many people that love the idea of Jesus but aren't sure yet, is you. That just is how it is. And I think what it does in people's lives is this. And anytime I mention music or movies or TV shows or whatever, it is not a, hey, this should be your top artist or anything else. So, and this is not a Christian story, and as Christians, we shouldn't feel like we have to make any beauty or love that's out there and try to make it a Christian one, because, if something's beautiful, if it's love, it's God created it and it shows us something. But it's very touching. I don't know if you've seen this, but I think this is what stories do in people's lives. This is an illustration of what I think happens in people's lives. Anybody know Lewis Capaldi? He's a Scottish singer. Anybody know him? Yeah, Luke does. One person. Okay. Well, Luke, you and I. All right, dial in, Luke. I'm going to tell you this story. Just me and you, man. So you may know the song, Someone You Loved. Anybody know? Any a little closer? A few more people, right? So the song is not about a lost girlfriend or this thing. It's about his grandmother. How sweet. He's this Scottish guy. He's about his grandmother. And he lost her. And so he started to write, how he felt afterwards. But the interesting thing about him, he's a big deal. And I guess not here. Let's not tell him. But he's a big deal. And I came across this video of him singing at this festival over in Europe, and there's 100,000 people in the crowd, and he gets ready to sing this song, and he has Tourette's syndrome, and he was really struggling with it, and he says to him, hey, just sorry, I'm struggling with this a little bit more right now, and and he has tics, and they're not tics like out here with the deers, but tics like with his body and stuff. And so he starts to sing, but then he really struggles. Like his body's not cooperating, his voice isn't cooperating. And look it up, okay? Look it up. And so he starts to sing, but the crowd, 100,000 people, together somehow figured out, let's complete the song for him. And so 100,000 people are belting it out, and they even show people in the crowd looking up the words because they don't necessarily know the words. But what struck me is that they filled a gap for him as he was struggling, and he didn't have to perform. He would try to join in a little bit, but he was still struggling. And then he just put the mic down and he's like, you guys got it. I think that's what our stories do for people. Like as we share, your neighbor, because you're a Christian, just so you know, they're watching you if they know you're a Christian. And if you're a Christian and they know, they probably think that you just came out of the womb that way, They've just always had it together. Or you've never struggled, or you've never needed the grace of God, or you've never sinned, it's pretty interesting, the assumptions that people have. But when you share your story of what God has done in your life, it fills in those gaps for people to the place that you complete the song for them. You see, it's like this. This is what Paul writes, and we'll end with this. Listen to this. He writes to the Corinthian Christians, he goes, you yourselves are our letter, written on our hearts. Listen, known and read by everyone. You are a living letter, your story, in whatever place you are, of Christ. And it's not something that takes great performance or tweaking or anything, but it's just, if you would just let your story come out amongst people and love people in that way and share it. It says, you show that you are a letter from Christ, the result of our ministry, written with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. Isn't that beautiful? That you all, as you go back to your apartment complex or your condo or your neighborhood, that you are this, there's words that God has written on your heart that are for others. It's right here. There's things in you when you go to work, that there's things that God has written on your heart that are to be shared. Look, I've led a lot of people to know Jesus Christ. Young, from very young to very old. And yet, you know what? There's people that I can't reach. There's people, those people, God put me to lead those people. There's people all around you that God has simply just put something in you that will bring them to Him. And yet it takes faith, it takes courage to walk across. And also it takes saying okay, I'm going to be a person that God's love can flow in and through. I'm going to be checkmated by this. I'm to love God, I'm to love my neighbor, and I'm to then bring this to other people in this place. And he calls all of us, said, will you make this your main thing? What if that was our main thing? What if that was the thing that we decided the world needed? What if it wasn't, better landscaping at our HOA? What if it was the love of Jesus? What if it was creating space for people to know Him? What if at work it wasn't that the air conditioning was always at your level, but it was, that people would be loved, What if the roads in your neighborhood, what if it wasn't the potholes that need to be fixed, but what if it was the heart of the people and their love for one another? Only Jesus can do that and fix those things. And so we sang today, right? God, only you can heal our land. Only you can do this. And he calls all of us saying, will you come together and be my vessels for this? Lord, we thank you for your word. We thank you for your love. We thank you for our neighbors. We thank you for our co-workers. And we thank you for who you are in our lives, Lord. I don't know, Lord. I don't know what has to happen. You may, just while we're going into worship, and take a posture of prayer. And if this is your heart, if you're saying, yeah, Lord, would you move in me and through me? Then just pray. I'd say it's a radical prayer, but it's just a prayer of a Christian. And just pray this to God and watch Him move in this way. Say, Lord, move anything out of my life that is keeping me from being the person you made me to be. Move anything out of my life that's keeping me from loving my neighbors and coworkers, Lord. Make me like you.
Thanks for listening this week. If you are looking for ways to serve, give, or get connected, go to vkcwest.com.